Hi, welcome or welcome back to my channel, and welcome to what, when this goes up, will probably be the third week in Orilium. I started reading about a week and a half into Orilium because I was in a horrific reading slump, so that means this will be my first week-ish reading recap. Orilium is, of course, the wonderful Readathon that is also known as the Magical Readathon created by G over at Book Roast, and I will leave her spring semester video linked down below for all of you in case you want to check it out. I will also leave my entire TBR for the spring semester. In the first week, I finished my first major, which was being a beast master. I'm supposed to be like kind and patient, and mostly I picked it because there was a unicorn and you get to interact with cute animals and go and like rescue them and tame them, and you get like a familiar, so this worked out great for me. I also finished all of the really scary, giant, really big sequels that I had to read, and if you are noticing, I look a little different. Books and clothes are not my only passion. I also love to play around with makeup. So I learned to do scales for this video because one of the books that I read was the third book in the Crescent City series by SJM, and oh boy, do we have stuff to talk about. I figure, you know what? If I can't have Halloween 4 times a year like I believe it should occur, Orilium's the closest I'm going to get right now, and I'm going to go with it. So this will be my third year completing my Beast Master major, I guess it's called, and the first class that I had to complete in order to do this was Elemental Studies. This semester we are learning to call lightning, and in order to complete this class I needed to read a book with a source of light on the front, and I chose First Light Winds by Ashley Elston for my pick. This was an interesting choice. I'll give you a brief description real quick since it's been a couple of weeks since my TBR video came out, and in case you missed that one. This is about Evie Porter, and she lives down south. She has everything a nice southern girl could want: a nice boyfriend, she's like about to move in with him, he's got a really nice house, he comes from money, she's got a decent job, things are going great for her. There's just like this teeny tiny problem with her and like her life with Ryan Sumner, that's the boyfriend. Evie Porter does not exist. No. This girl works for a guy named Mr. Smith. She works for him, and she sort of effed up her last job in a big way, so she needs to make sure that she really doesn't screw this one up, and she doesn't really know why she's there or why she's like been told to get close to this Ryan Sumner guy, but she's doing it. She's moving into them. Things are going great. She's waiting for like the last piece of the puzzle and her next like instructions to come to her, and she has to make sure she's constantly staying like one step ahead so she has the future, and also that the past doesn't catch up with her. And sure, she likes the challenge, but like the stakes are pretty high right now. That's all you really get from the description of the book, so I can't give a whole ton else away. I'm not usually someone who reads like spy-ish kind of stuff, which is very much how this reads. So first of all, I'm gonna say maybe I wouldn't have been as lost or as shocked if I was someone who typically reads this kind of thing, but I was kind of bored for the first 100 pages. I wasn't really sure what was going on. And if you feel the same way, just let the book breathe. You don't really know what you are reading for the first 100 pages. Then you're like, oh, and maybe you wouldn't be shocked if you've read this kind of thing before. I really haven't, so I had no idea what was coming. The one reason I think I was so bored was that I had a lot of trouble like connecting to the characters, and I'm fine with morally great characters, let me tell you. In fact, my favorite men are all morally great characters with really big libraries. The problem is that there is no one really good to root for in this book, and you keep waiting to find someone and find their redemption, and even with like all the background stuff that you keep learning about characters, I still couldn't be like, yeah, no, I forgive you for everything, I totally get it, I totally understand, I'm rooting for you in the end. I never felt like any of the characters became someone totally good, and that was a problem for me. When I'm rooting for people in books, I needed to feel like there's something there for me to be clinging to. I didn't notice the writing at all, which pretty much says everything it needs to say. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't really good, and because everything in the book was happening so quickly and everything was so new and different for me, I'm gonna say the writing probably got a little extra leeway that something, say, in the fantasy world would not for me. One thing that I really did have a lot of fun with was the ending. I'm gonna consider it the cherry on top of the sundae. Even for me, not knowing the tropes in this particular genre, I will say it was predictable, nostalgic, welcomed, all of the above. Oh, of course, it had to end this way. You got all those feelings, and it was very like, Yeah, you go, Evie. Yeah, this is fun. I loved the book for doing that for me, and it just made me smile so much. All in all, it's probably around a 3-ish star read. Not in a bad way, just in a, it was different for me, and I liked it, but I don't have a lot to compare it to. It was good, but it wasn't great. If it sounds good to you, you will probably like it, because it's going to deliver on all of the fronts that you would expect it to, and still give you lots of surprises. Next, I had to do my animal studies course, always a favorite. We're studying little pebble ducks, which are little earth elementals that are apparently like stone duck things, and I got made so much fun of for not knowing what that is. For this, I read Just Another Missing Person by Gillian or Gillian McAllister. I've heard it said both ways. And this is my first book by her, but this is the author who kind of blew up last year for Wrong Place, Wrong Time. This one is about a mom who is actually a detective, and she is working on a missing persons case. This girl goes missing named Olivia, and she's like 22. She has no history of running away. There's CCTV because this takes place over in England. There's footage of her like running into this alleyway, and it's a dead end. There's no windows, no doors, no like hidden exits or entryways, or there's no way for her to escape, but she's just gone. The only thing that was in there were these trash cans, and like, no, nothing, nada, zero. No one can solve this mystery, and she's working on it, she's getting into it, she's interviewing people, and all of a sudden she gets kidnapped. This person's like, you cannot solve this mystery. You are going to frame this other person for doing it, and I'm blackmailing you into doing it because I know a secret about you and your daughter. It's her worst secret. It's like, it cannot come out. It will ruin her life, sure, but it also will ruin her daughter's life. So what's mom to do? This was such an interesting book because not only is there a mystery that needs to be solved, but she needs to figure out who's trying to blackmail her, why, and then there's this massive quandary of a huge moral dilemma. Plus, you don't exactly know what her secret totally is at first either with her and her daughter. So there's that as well. And then even that, there's this kind of mystery surrounding it. So it's more complicated than you expect it to be. I found it so interesting. I really appreciated that each mystery also had this maternal theme going through it, and it gave this thriller slightly an elevated sense because it made you really think as well. So this one definitely was somewhat unexpected for me. The writing was so distinctive too. If you had described it to me initially, I would have been like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna like this, but it was great. The writing was staccato, and it was constantly propelling the story forward. It felt like how a detective would think. Short, succinct, smart, distinctive, and one thought would move into the next before you were even getting to that thought because you were always thinking ahead. I loved it. It was so effective and felt very true to the story and the point of view from which the story was told. However, as much as I loved the writing and how it explored a theme like how far mothers would go, and it was so interesting, and I loved how all of the storylines became so entangled, at the end there were just too many twists. And I know that is a really weird thing to complain about when it comes to talking about a thriller. Like, how can you complain about that? Some of them were obvious, some of them were super shocking, but quite frankly, after you get so many twists and you are like already on the ground because the rug has already been pulled out from underneath you and you're already down there, okay? There's nowhere farther for me to fall. It loses its effectiveness when I've been shocked so many times that you can continue doing it all you want, but I am out of gasps. Overall, I think this is a 4-star read for me. I really enjoyed it. I had a great time. I absolutely recommend it. I would love to read more from this author and see what other kinds of books she has out. I thought this was a great read. Definitely recommend it. It could have been a 5-star if the author could have just pulled it back a little bit at the end and chosen which twists were really important and the most effective, and then they would have been that much more impactful. Next up comes Alchemy, the first of our big fat sequels. We're going to be talking about all of the sequels that I read in this less than a week. It was less than a week. They're all over 550 pages up to over 800 pages. So it was quite the week. The great thing about Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros is I don't think I need to talk about the first book very much at all. We all know it. Violet Sorrengail goes to dragon riding school. She's not supposed to be there. She's very damageable. She has a disease that affects her muscles and her joints and makes her very breakable, but she goes anyway. Her ability to deal with pain because she's been in it her whole life actually becomes a strength because no one else is used to being in pain all the time. What a statement. She finds an old friend there who is sort of an old flame, and then it ends up being more of an enemies to lovers with a guy named named Xaden, who's enemies for reasons. And of course, their job, once they get through a bunch of their training, is to go to Threshing and see if they can bond to dragons. Would anyone like to guess if she bonds to dragons? So I'm going to try and talk about this book as best as I can without spoiling anything. I loved Fourth Wing so much. I know that some people were like, oh my god, this is just like an amalgamation of every fantasy book ever, and if you love this, you're just like not a great fantasy reader and all these things. Okay, I loved it because it reminded me of all the things that I love in fantasy. It's everything I loved in fantasy. We've got dragons, enemies to lovers, we've got the underdog, we've got found family, we've got a girl who loves to study but is also learning to fight, we've got rebels, we've got all this underlying secret stuff. That's why I loved Fourth Wing. It was fun. It brought back nostalgia. And why are you going to say that makes a book bad when it just brings so many people so much joy and brings new people to the genre who are like, oh my gosh, look at how much fun you can have reading fantasy. Iron Flame took all the joy out of it. Iron Flame sat there and was like, okay, now we have to go and do all the serious stuff and up the ante. We're gonna take second year and we're gonna just make it that much worse. And we're gonna take all the dangers that we showed you in the first book and now we're going to make them that much worse. And I just don't think it was very much fun to read. The tonal shift, okay, the best description I can give you, and I try not to talk about this series too much on my channel because man, I hate that the author is just so transphobic, and you can fight with me and say no, she's not, but yes, she is. Harry Potter. It is like jumping from book 1 to book 7, except it's book 1 to book 2. It was rough, okay? You need a dramatic build in order to have that kind of payoff. You need to love your characters and you need to build your relationships with them and build their relationships in order to have that kind of climax. And you can't do that in 2 books. You just can't do that in 2 books. At least Rebecca Yarros couldn't with this series. My complaints more specifically, there were so many cliffhangers and dramatic reveals, and they were done just for a dramatic effect. So many chapters ended this way and were ended so badly that not only were they not necessary, they didn't even necessarily make sense chronologically, dramatically, or in terms of the narrative, just so they could occur at that moment. The pacing and structure as a result overall were just a mess. You could never catch your breath, which was done on purpose, but you could feel that it was done on purpose. It felt very sloppy, slapdash, and like the editing was really, really rushed. And Violet and Xaden, I was rooting for this couple. We all know that book couples are gonna go through issues, okay? If that's a spoiler, I'm sorry. Violet and Xaden are fighting at the end of the first book. But Rebecca Yarros is like, you know what? We're gonna go ahead and let them have all the physical stuff because that's what audiences want, and they're gonna still like speak together that way and feel each other that way. And yet they're never, ever, ever going to be on the same page in terms of how they want to communicate, how they believe they should communicate. There is nothing that they agree on that I can come up with just about period other than like dragons good and certain people bad. But the physical stuff, because that's all they were doing when they were together and they weren't talking, I don't think there's a single spicy scene that came close to anything that happened in the first book, and it just felt kind of empty. I couldn't feel their chemistry because it didn't even make sense for them to be getting together. And I can't even blame your dragons because you're blocking them out right now. That would have at least made sense. Bring back the dragons getting it on and you two going at it because that's getting you back together, because at least that was logical. God, did that sentence just come out of my mouth. Wow. Also, the twists, not believable. The cliffhanger at the end of the last book, jaw-dropping. The cliffhanger at the end of this book, hated on a plot level, on a this is out of character, this would not happen, I don't think this makes sense. I think it may ruin the book, and I don't think Rebecca Yarros is going to follow through on it. I am really annoyed at what happened to one of my favorite dragons throughout the whole book. She frustrated me to no end. If you read it, you know what I'm talking about. Will I continue on the series? Yes, I want to see what happens. I want to know what happens, but I'm nervous that the first book was a one-off and the rest of the series I'm just not going to enjoy at all. You took what was so great from the first book and you removed it all and left us with this grim story that was joyless. 3 stars. graciously. After this was restoration. I needed to read a book that could help me regain consciousness. And for this, I needed to choose a book that I thought could help me get out of a reading slump. And for this, I chose 3 sequels: House of Blood and Flame, Bloodmarked, and A Curse of Blood and Stone. I ended up not reading A Curse of Blood and Stone by K.A. Tucker. That got dropped, and I'll be reading my backup choice, which was a thriller instead, which I'm so happy to be getting into. I also had to read lore for this, which was just The Legend of Dia, which is this short, cute story, which I won't recap, but it's just this origins story about a goddess who helps Aldea learn the importance of not living forever, because people can become like unappreciative of life and become sort of lost and angry and upset and forget how beautiful it is to love and be a part of the world. So it was a really nice story, and she is incredible for creating all of this. So I have 3 massive sequels that I have left to talk about. I think I'm going to talk about the Well of Ascension first, actually. This is technically for my Thread Mage major, but I don't think anyone's going to yell at me. So this is Mistborn Book 2. The first book is called The Final Empire, and this is by Brandon Sanderson. If you are intimidated by Brandon Sanderson because he is high fantasy, don't be. I was at first too, especially because I knew my husband read him, and generally speaking, anything my husband reads is going to be too much for me. He can do all the math science stuff, and I'm... Okay, 9 plus 5, you're making me do actual math. I can't. But Mistborn is such an interesting series. So the Final Empire sort of begs the question, what if the bad guy is 1? Yeah, no, he's such an upper, right? So he has this world where the bad guy won, and he lives in this massive, giant, scary castle. They have these like terrifying guys with spikes in their eyes running around and like making sure nobody does anything bad. And he's like named the Lord Ruler, and he is like the most powerful guy. No one can defeat him, and he's freaking terrifying. In the very first book, we learn about this incredible magic system that exists in this world where people can ingest metals. Some people, not all, and you can do something magical with it depending what it is. You might be able to ingest a certain metal and be able to send a copper cloud around you, and no one can see that anyone in it is ingesting metals and using powers. Or you might be able to throw coins at people and they become like weapons. Other people can ingest metals and become very, very strong. But if you can ingest all the metals and have all the powers from them, you are what's called a Mistborn. And we meet 2 Mistborns in the first book, one called Kelsier and one called Vin. And Kelsier is sort of leading this rebellion. He's like, I've had enough of this Lord Ruler guy. He's terrible. He's got this whole found family around him, and all of them have a power at the very least. And he finds Vin and realizes she's a Mistborn and decides he's going to train this little like female street urchin and take her under his wing, and they're going to take on Lord Ruler. It was amazing. And the second book follows Vin with her new romantic interest and follows on after the events of the first book. So, after the disaster that was Iron Flame, I felt like I needed to pick this one up, because when I say I trust Brandon Sanderson, I don't trust him with his characters. I don't trust that he's going to keep everyone nice and safe and cozy. I know that he's not going to give me any smut or great romance. He lives in Utah, okay, and he's like one of those really like innocent religions.
The Book of Mormon.
Anyway, I knew he would at least give me a good book. I've never given any of his books less than a 4 or a 5. I think this is probably a 4, just because some of his books are so off the charts amazing, like made me bawl my eyes out, but this was still, for other authors, would have been a 5. That's a terrible thing to say, but it's so true. First of all, I just want to thank Brandon Sanderson. In the back of the book, he does this magical, wonderful thing, reference charts for the metals and what they all do. He has a glossary with all the characters reminding you of who they are and what they are and what they've done. But there's also this magical, wonderful, amazing, delightful thing, summary of book 1. Look at that. How many authors do that? no one. And it's short enough that it's not overbearing, but it has every salient detail that you need to remind you of all the important stuff, trip your memory, get everything going again. Thank you, Brandon Sanderson. Why don't all fantasy authors do this, especially when your books are going to be massive and huge and have really complicated magic systems? That's one of the best things he does, and it continues to be amazing in this book. World building. His world building is phenomenal, and it continues to be and stay phenomenal in this book, but it is a hard magic system. There are completely defined rules that cannot and will not be broken by anyone and anything in these books. And yet, you are still shocked and amazed by how they are used because he can practically defy them just by knowing the rules so well. It sounds so nerdy when I put it that way, but it's incredible. Things like body weights. If you're much lighter and you get into a battle of pulling against someone else for a piece of metal who's much heavier than you, obviously the heavier person's still gonna win. It's things like that. Learning to use those things to your advantage and manipulating the magic system where he gets really creative and lets his characters show their brilliance. I still maintain, however, some of the fights were just too dang long. So I think that his characters, my one complaint is that they are less developed. They are so predictable. There's the noble one, there's the good-hearted rogue. I mean, the main character obviously is going to be having some stuff going on, but the side characters are not going to be going through any massive changes. I think it's all done very much on purpose. You know, we are seeing the characters being the things that are filler at first, because it's the story itself. That's the thing that has been absolutely subverted in the beginning. So it makes perfect sense because otherwise we would have been totally overwhelmed. The romance, yeah, I already mentioned, it's painfully lacking, okay? Painfully lacking. At one point, it literally says that Vin and her romantic interest have been living together for 2 years. For 2 years. We barely see them kiss. We certainly don't see them do anything beyond kissing. We don't even know if they're staying in the same room and yet they're like living in the same house. Like, are you kidding me? And this is very symbolic of their entire relationship because their communication at one point, I swear to you, this guy is like, oh my God, I cannot tell her how I truly feel. I must be strong. And she's like, oh my God, I can't tell him that I saw a look of fear in his eyes. I must be strong for him and not tell him that I know how he really feels. How old are you two? Anyway, there were deliberate political machinations. Nothing was forced or felt ridiculous. There were no massive surprises all of a sudden. People were actually taking the time to make plans and talk things out. The ending wasn't rushed. It was as epic as it needed it to be. All of the misdirection and then the gasp moments and all of the things that were revealed, it was just fantastic. It was original. It was great. It was surprising in places. Brandon Sanderson can spin a tale like nobody else. It's fresh. It's original. It almost feels like science fiction in places. I think, having never read science fiction, you're not gonna be disappointed. Probably this should be 5 stars, quite frankly. It really should. He's done better, and yet why wouldn't this be 5 stars just because he's done better? Can anyone else do better? Very few. Welcome to the reason I am currently in my reputation era. I guess I was listening to all of Taylor Swift's previous works leading up to the Tortured Poets department. Poetry, this was not, I'll tell you that much. And I am a Sarah J. Maas fan, okay? I've heard them called Massassins, I've heard them called masochists, and let me tell you, masochist is definitely the way to go after reading this delight. I'm going to take you through my journey of the Crescent City books. Reading House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas was quite the experience. I gave this book such an easy 5 stars. And if you don't know what this is about Bryce. She, 50 pages into this book, experiences something that set me absolutely sobbing. I did not see it coming. She didn't see it coming. We were all shocked. As a direct result of this super traumatic event in her life, she gets involved in being asked to help solve this basically serial killer issue and is assigned an angel to do so. His name is Hun Athalar. He's, of course, typical alpha hole, gorgeous, fallen angel. He is also enslaved to the Asteri, who are the evil people in this world, who are these massive all-powerful beings who basically enslave angels who didn't stand with them the first time around when they tried to have an uprising, and now they sort of rule the entire planet. And on this planet is everything, and I do mean everything. We have angels, we have demons. Bryce was best besties with a bunch of wolves. She is half fae herself. We've got some dragon stuff. We've got sprites. We've got witches. We've got mermaids. We have really cute little otters who will deliver your mail, believe it or not. They're all living together in somewhat harmony under the really scary hysteria, okay? That's the general gist we got. Not only did I cry 50 pages in, but I sobbed hysterically for the last, hour of this book. And if you can hear, through all things, love is possible, my friends are with me and I am not afraid, or lighted up and not want to cry, you have not read these books. So that's book 1 in this series. I was really counting down the days until the second book came out, House of Sky and Breath. I was excited to see Hunt on the cover. I was like, good for you. I could not have been more invested in this book if it was about my own life, okay? By the end, I mean, it is mic drop. Could be the opening to my favorite book of all time. I had such high hopes, but it also had so much going on. And I knew, we all knew, it was going to go one of two ways. Either the third book in this series was going to be the best thing we've ever read, or not. So, was this my favorite SJM book of all time? I'm pretty sure you can all tell already, despite my incredible commitment to this book. No. For me, this book was divided into 3 parts. The first part was about 200 pages, and I'm going to be talking about characters and places and things that are mentioned in the first book, but I'm going to try really hard not to spoil anything. In the beginning of the book, we're going back and forth between 3 very split points of view. We've got Bryce very much on her own, and I mean that, like, she's not with anyone else, but she's also split very far geographically from everyone else in the book. And then we've got Rune and Hunt, and I don't remember if we knew the third character or that they're with or not too well from the first book, so I'm not going to mention him, but the 3 of them are in a really unfortunate situation. They're having a really bad time with the Asteri. Here's the big spoiler that I'm worried about saying. They're being tortured in the dungeons. That's it. And then we're also seeing sort of everybody else, like the wolves and Therion and everyone, sort of hanging around in the rest of the city and dealing with the aftermath of the book. And we're seeing Therion sort of like fighting in the underground ring and all the stuff that's going on everywhere else, sort of lumped together in this massive collection of point of views. If it sounds complicated and confusing and somehow also vaguely boring at the same time, I'm going to tell you right now that reading through Rune and Hunt and their situation, it is extremely upsetting. It is extremely graphic. I could not handle it. I had to skim through most of it, if not downright skip it. It was unnecessary. It was too much. I couldn't handle it. Okay, we have that. We have all the stuff that was occurring in the city that I think we could have seen done more succinctly. And then we see the stuff I was really excited for, which is Bryce's stuff. We all knew we were going to be seeing really exciting stuff that was potentially opening up the world, potentially giving us all sorts of new exciting possibilities, giving us a ton of lore that we'd been waiting for, and it was just such a disappointing waste. It felt like a side quest. And it ended up just being this giant info dump. We didn't see what we wanted to see. We didn't see who we wanted to see. We didn't see anything. I lost the pacing. It was disorienting. The first 200 pages were just such a mess. And the initial reaction was that if you're going to send Bryce off into something so specific by herself, that the first 200 pages could have just been devoted entirely to her, because when we get to the middle of the book, once Bryce gets back, it is just this convoluted disaster. I was bored, it was unwieldy, and I could literally feel SJM losing control of her own book. She literally dropped plot devices into the book, right in the dead center of it, in the form of 2 new characters out of desperation. They made no sense in terms of anything else in the book or how they came to be. And then we get to the ending. There is this huge Deus Ex Machina that did not work at all. It did not make sense. I knew it was ridiculous. I hated it. Logically, it was impossible for the ending to have worked out the way that it did. The ending also had characters acting completely out of place. If I can feel you making your characters do things out of character, that's really a bad sign. Ultimately, at the end, SJM writes this scene where Bryce has a chance to do a good job and can just end the book in a way that might be slightly anticlimactic but makes total and complete sense, and yet SJM's like, oh no, this is too easy. I have to make it not work and put everyone in extreme mortal danger and make this 10 times harder because it's too easy. Now you put yourself in a situation where I can't believe that everyone's gonna get out okay, no matter how you write it. You had it. You had it. It was there and you ruined it. And the part that kills me is that if she had taken the time to give Bryce those 200 pages in the beginning, if she had made alliances and friends and could call on them, I think there were people there who maybe had the powers who could have saved her in a realistic way and given us all what we wanted based on the ending of the second book, and still set up what she did at the end of this book to give her leeway into future books, but she didn't. This book was just a big giant disappointment, and it could have been my favorite book of the year. Will I continue on with the Crescent City series? Yes, of course. Will I continue on reading all of her books? Of course I'm going to. I'm so invested in all of her characters and all of her worlds. I know that her next book is going to be in the ACOTAR world, and I need to know who Azrael's mate is. And it better not be Elaine. Winreal forever. I will fight anyone on this. Bring it on. Last one I read was Bloodmarked. This is book 2 in the Legendborn cycle by Tracy Dion. Thank you so much to BM Van Loo for convincing me to read Bloodmarked and letting me know that I could use this in my interim book to help me get through Crescent City 3, because she was like, hey, you think you're going to be getting this awful torture scene, and I know you're attached to Bree. It's okay. You can read the book. You're gonna be okay, and so is she. Thank you for that, because thanks to you, I was able to put that book down, pick this one up, and know I was safe reading it. So thank you. This is a really interesting Arthurian legend retelling. We have Bree, who is going to like a boarding high school. It feels like a college campus. Just picture a college campus and you've got it down. Once she gets to this high school campus, it's North Carolina, she sees like freaking demon, and she realizes, wow, something is up. And sure enough, on this campus there is this sort of group of students that is sort of like a fraternity, only they're all sort of like knights and scions and have magic, and you have to be invited in because in order to be there you have to be linked to descendants of the Round Table. The really big important people there will eventually sort of be scions of the Knights of the Round Table, including King Arthur himself, which basically means you inherit their powers and are sort of their like current incarnation on Earth, and it is their job to not only fight against demons on Earth and protect the unsuspecting mortals, but it is also their job to, when the end of the world comes on, which happens every so many centuries, believe it or not, you gotta fight it off and keep things going. It's kind of a tough gig, but you also get magic, you get to summon like swords and stuff, you get to train in sword fighting, there's a Merlin guy, plus, you know, it's kind of a bonding experience for life when you're, you know, fighting for your lives. So, once in a lifetime experience, constant threat of death. Bree doesn't really get much of a choice because she immediately shows that she can see demons and has these powers, and lo and behold, in the first book, she sort of kind of maybe realizes that she has romantic interests in the current heir-to-be for King Arthur. His name's Nick. He's a nice guy. He's handsome. But the current Merlin guy on campus is also kind of hot. But he's also like part demon because of the magic power thing. So complicated. There's trials and combat, and like Bree's got a lot going on. Also, she's got her own kind of like secret powers hidden under there called like root, and it comes from her like black ancestry, and that kind of complicates things. Anyway, we get to book 2. That is not Nick. That is the Merlin guy. So you know there's stuff going on. And here we are. Did I enjoy book 2? Was it fantastic as BM Van Loo suggested? It was. Thank God I got to read this dead in the middle of that other disaster. I love how there's 2 opposing magic systems. You even get the 2 opposing colors. You get the rich history. We see the whole root system coming up. You see how it is historically linked to slavery. Bree is this amazing, strong black woman. Even at the age of 16, she's a woman. Let's face it. Things that I would not have thought about, even when she's traveling, talking about hair care and how to deal with things. This book is so sensitive to all of that because obviously Tracy Deonn is a Black author, and I just loved the care taken to all those details. They become symbolic of something so much larger in books like this, and I really appreciate how sensitively and carefully it's done. Arthurian legend is always going to have a love triangle. It is a requirement. The way they're doing it in this book, this does not go beyond PG, and this is the one that got me like warm-cheeked and like my heart a-fluttering with a kiss scene. Okay, a kiss. This is the one that got me going out of everything I read this week. Tracy Deonn, if you ever write a full-on like love scene, I'm gonna be in big freaking trouble. This love triangle is amazing. This is a great example of how to pace the road trip, how to pace the time of travel, how to continually add new locations and new characters, how to make it feel like the pace is exactly where it needs to be, not rushed, and yet you're constantly moving. I don't know quite how a book that was constantly changing locations and adding new characters the entire time we were going managed to feel so stable and steady. The writing itself too contrasted with what was going on in SJM, where the writing felt like just a secondary throwaway thought. It really did. This writing felt thoughtful, deliberate. There was an actual voice to this, which was really nice and refreshing. The ending of this book, might I add, was so wild. It was surprising, and yet the little seeds had been planted. I shouldn't have been as shocked as I was. They were there, it was possible, and yet just when I thought like, oh my god, this is wild, the book went and was like, wait, I'm not done. We're gonna go even crazier, and I'm gonna give you something that's even wilder, and yet if you look at it from a symbolic point of view, it's gonna be even like more amazing. Things didn't always come super easily. There was a learning curve, and that cliffhanger. We have to wait till 2025 to get the next book. How can you do this? This is YA. How can you do this to teenagers? I wholeheartedly recommend this series. I don't care what age you are. You're gonna read this, you're gonna eat this up. I thought this was just as good as the first book. I think this is another 5-star. I really do. I had the best time reading this. And is that maybe because I read half of Crescent City and then read that and then had to read the rest of Crescent City, and the contrast was just like shocking? Possibly. But you know what? I loved it. So that was my first week of reading at Orilium. I'm now a Beastmaster, and I'm partially done with Red Mage now, and I'm also currently in the middle of Peril in Pink and reading another thriller, and I'm having just the best time. I love Orilium with my whole heart. I hope the makeup thing wasn't too weird. I was listening to Taylor Swift and having so much fun and really into the vibes. And yes, I know this would be much more wild form druid because they're the ones who actually like turn into animals, but I wanted to try a new makeup technique, and I don't think you've really seen me play around with costuming makeup, which is something I really enjoy doing. I think this will probably come in handy because we usually do at least 2 big family costumes in the fall, and I'm hearing peacocks and mermaids, so I better get my makeup game on ASAP. But that is all from me. I will let you get back to your book. I'll say books. It's a big reading month, and I'll be getting back to my books, and I can't wait to tell you all about more of them. Although I think my next video coming out will probably be my what I'm looking forward to most coming out in May and June video, I think. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.